Welcome to the BPM 360 podcast. I'm Russell.
And I'm Casper. And together we will help you navigate the treacherous waters of the BPM adoption journey. I hope you enjoy the podcast. Russell, how are you doing, my friend?
Caspar, it's great. We've switched our schedule. It's a Friday, so hey, happy Friday, not a Monday
Thank God
morning.
it's Friday. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Monday morning was maybe not the best part to do these recordings, right?
Well, I think we were awake enough, one coffee, and then I'm ready to go.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Hey, Russell, listen, last episode, we talked about procedures. We talked about management of change. We talked about how organizations can make sure that whatever it is that they're doing with BPM at least stays current and up to date. However, towards the end of that episode, I think you mentioned also a set of different procedures that organizations need to think about or may need to put in place, that we decided that was good to come back on that. So would you be so kind and just take us through that those kind of procedures that you had in mind, so we can elaborate on it and share it with our listeners?
Okay. Yes, I think as I recall it, I was referring to based on the actual setup of your process management organization, what use cases you are supporting, so which services you're offering. The main purpose of procedures is actually to establish, let's say, routines and a regular also exchange of communication to your with your peers and stakeholders. So I think instead of just thinking about the typical, very mechanistical, let's say, process approval workflow and the very, say, detailed, specific, let's say, demand and change management process, I think you have to think procedures on a much more level of how can you establish routines in communicating with your stakeholders. And here, what I really liked, I was talking to a friend of mine who's in process management for many years, and I was looking at, and actually opened my eyes to a certain extent, because I said, I also, my background, a lot of these methods and tools and getting things very formalized. And I said, so, but how do you manage processes? What are your processes? He says, well, for example, we have, regular community meetings. We have regular, setups where we invite a dedicated set of business partners to discuss their day-to-day problems. And at first I was like struck. I was saying, oh, okay, so they have like they meet up for coffee and have a bit of a chat. Is that it's like, let's the feel good process management. But then I was thinking, but it is a procedure. Yeah, it's not super formalized. It's not like a workflow behind it, but there's a routine behind it. And as I mentioned in the last to the end of the last episode, I was saying, and that is even maybe even more important to think about how you actually establish these procedures in your communication and building the community, establishing, expanding the community, and as I also mentioned last time, reinventing and refining your offering. And that's something about that I really was intrigued. So when you talk about procedures, it sounds like the process of process management. Sounds like, yes, let's do a BPMN for that.
I was just about to mention that, indeed.
And then you have on the other side actually to think on a very much more not even informal necessarily, but on a total different level of management procedures that you need to think about and establish. And I think there's sometimes they're harder to establish because you cannot just formalize them and write it down on a piece of paper and say this is we have to follow these procedures. Because here it's also a lot about the change, the change of the culture and getting people to engage in the process management engagement. And that is the big the big challenge. So after talking to this guy, I said, okay, so you don't have so many workflows and formal procedures and methodologies, but actually your level of maturity concerning process management, the each understanding of their part in the organization to drive forward process excellence is so well established that by having these ceremonies, these routines, they
Yeah.
can continuously evolve. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so and that was, well, it was quite an eye opener for me because it just showed, yeah, it's, a fool with a tool is still a
True.
fool,
Yeah. Sure.
and all these things. And you can make things work on very informal base, but you have to continuously work on keeping these things alive.
Yeah.
That was
I
like the point.
absolutely agree. It makes me think back to when I was managing a center of excellence for BPM by myself and with a couple of people. And yes, of course, we had formal procedures in place. But that's much more about what we talked about in the last episode. So that's around management of change. That was around other things. But one thing we also did is to make sure that our main stakeholder group, which was basically the collection of global process owners of the company, that they stayed up to date on not just what we were doing, but the state of affairs of their processes. In other words, if you have a collection of GPOs at the table, the only thing that they want to know is, how is my process doing? They don't care about the other processes, basically, but how's my process doing? And where do I need to put some additional attention in? So what we did, it was actually not quite simple, but we started making reports, which is kind of formal, but we made reports on, listen, this is your process domain. These are the number of standardized process we have. And for each of the business groups that we have that fall under your responsibility from a process owner point of view, how many times do they actually use these standardized processes? And if they deviate from them, what kind of processes are they executing and how similar are they to the standard? And that's just an example. And the content of the example, so the actual topic doesn't really matter that much. We can come back to that in the center of excellence part that we're going to cover next. But the whole point is that you, on a regular basis, engage with your stakeholders and give them information that is of value to them, will engage them and keep them involved to a much higher degree than when you just do a report every week that you send out, for instance. It's that interaction between the people receiving the information and their assessment that it is of value to them, and getting that feedback from them. That is something that drives your adoption as well, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I think I mean, you saying we want to cover certain things with the COE, but we definitely have to then always just make sure that we don't forget things when we move forward to the next part of the framework, because here you see that even the idea of what information is actually relevant and for these people, and how do you present it in a form that it is digestible for them, that they don't have a complete overload or that it's a complete oversimplicity. I think we will talk a lot about that on the level of methodology and tools. And as I say, I've got itchy fingers to get into that topic. But
yeah, I'm just writing down a note to make sure that we don't forget about that.
But so again here, I think the challenge about procedures is like many things, you set them up, and you have this like plan. You have your roadmap for BPM, but keeping, and that's maybe coming back to the point I already mentioned. How do you actually maintain the relevance of whatever procedure you establish? Yeah. So as I mentioned, if you're in a phase where, for example, there's a big business transformation, maybe more on a project base, then a very thorough due diligence of say managing the process documentation is necessary. If as soon as you come out of this phase and you have like more say, more an established IT system, the processes are more or less established, you just have regular audits, then all of a sudden there's a complete shift on focus. So the relevance of these process and process changes, they're more incremental rather than big disruptive changes. So it's delegated to other people. The frequency of changes is different. As I said, it's more incremental changes happen. So here, the procedures that were at the beginning totally suitable, all of a sudden they change. And this is what I actually meant, that in very many cases, you have to be very open for adjusting these procedures.
But
And
doesn't that also
stay
mean,
relevant?
yeah, and sorry to interrupt here, but doesn't that also mean that managing a BPM project and implementing BPM has a lot of similarities with managing any type of project? Because we're talking about topics, and some of them are very relevant and very specific for BPM. But I read a rather interesting comment on LinkedIn on the announcement of, I think, our first episode, that, well, this is a very valuable framework no matter what the type of project you're doing, which of course is a big compliment. But we'll make it, of course, BPM specific. But when we talk about how do you keep stakeholders engaged, and what kind of informal things do you need to put in place to foster and create a culture around process management, well, you can fill in any topic in instead of process management, and you'll get sort of the same type of things. Or am I just hallucinating now because it's Friday afternoon?
Well, I think you're on the way to that. So,
I should have stayed away from the mushrooms.
no.
Yeah.
So if that answer had come from ChatGTP, you would have said, "Hey, you know what? ChatGTP is hallucinating."
Yeah, but that's true.
No. But in reality, I think there's something about it. But maybe let's turn this around. Maybe this framework, I think, is okay. If you look at the top level terms, you could say, yeah, they're generic terms. They do apply for all kinds of projects. Okay, let's say projects. Yeah, not
or technology
transformation,
projects, or whatever.
But then let's look at it. But process management really looks into this framework and tries to make sense of it. So all what we're talking about, the methodologies and the tools, and each bit and byte about it, is how can you manage this constellation in the context of change?
Okay.
And I know that there's other like ideas around how to manage this, say like agile approach and and scrums and all these kind of like things. But I think process management inherently that's why if you look at, say, so what is process management offering as a service?
Okay.
In the context of a use case. Now, I mentioned this at the beginning. What are the use cases typically? There can be a big IT transformation. There can be a big business transformation. There can be an audit compliance
regulatory management
related change. So
absolutely.
each of these are projects. And each of these needs or BPM offers the services to manage these projects better. Because, and this is one of the key points about process management, because we believe that process centricity is the key for creating a common understanding of different stakeholders throughout an organization. The old idea of, say, business and, activities and IT systems and risks and compliance, and all comes together in one big picture. If you have a common understanding, a common book of knowledge around your business in the context of processes, and you follow a process-centric approach, you do your project better. Wow.
Yeah. Hallelujah.
And so that's why inherently what you said is exactly, you could turn it around. Yeah. So from that, that comment, you should go back and say, yes, and that's exactly the reason, because the framework is the whole process management is around managing this framework, these aspects, bringing them together. And therefore, the key services of process management is to support a company in its various different projects.
So what you've just said and what you've just done, and you might not even realize this, is we once and for all now settled the discussion on what is the added value of BPM. I
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
Process centricity helps you do other projects better. I mean,
Yeah.
I like that as a catchphrase, and what that means, and is that the benefits you get from implementing BPM, so taking that process-centric view on the way that you work, is typically an indirect benefit because it enables other projects that will give you real benefits to be done more efficiently, faster, less error-prone, and more sustainably.
Absolutely. Yep.
All right, that's good because I very often find myself in a situation where I need to explain to organizations what the value is of process management. They very often are in line with what the value is of process mining, which is of course one of the parts of process management. And I'm going to get in big trouble for saying it like this, but anyway, um, the benefit chain of events for BPM is not a direct one; it's an indirect one, but it's still a powerful one, and that is something that we need to explain time and time again. So I think I'm just going to cut out that little part of what you just explained. I'm just going to run that at every meeting I have. So listen to this guy, and
Yeah.
just put it on, Russell. But
Of course, I'm biased. Everybody else will say so. But
well,
no,
I'll
it'll be
put
interesting
royalties
to.
to it.
Well, what we should do is, and at some later phase, we should also get into this discussion about, as I said, the real business the view on this without having this like this say, is it IT driven or is it business driven? Is
Yeah.
the enterprise architecture actually taking care of this role? And I would say, I don't care. Now,
Okay.
ultimately, if you look at there's a lot of difference in terminologies and stuff like that. But if you look at, say, there's two aspects. Generally, on an abstract level, the framework as you've built it up and we've been discussing, you will find in any other methodology, you will find the same points somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
They may be called differently and structured maybe slightly different, but I think they're generally accepted. And and then you come down to certain differences like philosophy around the actual methodology and taxonomy and the meta models and on that level. That's where they go beyond.
Yeah.
But the fundamental aspects where what process management tries to do is and that is to bring together all the different stakeholders to coordinate all initiatives of change that are happening and link them with the reason why, yeah, coming from the
Yeah.
strategy or the compliance requirements, etc., and then linking it to who and what has to be done. Yeah, so
Yeah.
this is like
Yeah.
this view here. And then you can say is a process model more worth than a capability model and all this. But
Oh God,
I mean,
yes.
ultimately, I think that you're getting down to a level of, well, not philosophy, but it's like, different parties, everybody wants peace and wants to rule the world, but
Yeah.
ultimately, we are talking about the same. And that's something I think is
Yeah.
what we have to, yeah, also, is
Yeah,
that right?
absolutely true. And I think that again the a little bridge into the next episode, Russell, is that one way of embodying this and making it concrete is via the concept of a center of excellence. And we'll be diving into that one in the next episode.
I think
Yeah, but
absolutely. Then because one thing we're definitely be going to be touching on in a lot of different aspects. That's why I think this discussion isn't bad actually, because what you find is with procedures as well is that when you want to set up your procedures, coming up with process management, what you find an environment that is already riddled with procedures.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
oh absolutely,
And then you, let's say, talk about center of excellence, you bring in your methodology and you bring in your tools and you're in a company and it's riddled with tools and is riddled with
oh yes,
methodology.
oh
So what are we
yes,
actually talking about? So with the procedures, what I do think is quite interesting for companies is that process management will help can fill the gaps. And what I like about process management from its general idea is it's bringing parties together. It's that's why this bridging the gap. I know it sounds it's over, being used again and again.
If it works,
but I really think about this, especially around again coming back because we are still talking about the procedures here. That the basic thinking of a process manager, like Center of Excellence, who wants to establish that is really, and that's where we started our journey with the sponsorship and stakeholders, is really finding out who needs to talk to whom. And how can I facilitate this dialogue? And then what are the methods and tools that will help, as you were saying, with the procedures? What was the information that I could present in a manner to facilitate this dialogue?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
And that's what process management does. And that's what I think is really cool. I mean, that's what we do.
That's what we're going to talk about in the next episode. And we need to finish up this one, Russell, because time flies. Unfortunately, we can talk for hours. I know, even days.
Well, it is Friday, so we can always jump into a weekend.
It is Friday, and I don't want to keep my kids waiting at school, to be very honest. So I need to pick them up, and I want to. But nevertheless, Russell, it was a pleasure as usual. I wish you a very pleasant weekend.
Likewise.
And we'll talk to each other in the next recording.
Okay.
Or outside of that.
Yeah.
Have a good weekend.
Talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening. Cheers.
Bye.